I'm going to talk about, if you've been in the JavaScript world, you've probably had to use Webpack and Babel, and there are alternatives out there. So, first of all, what is Webpack and Babel if you're new to this? Webpack is an open source compiler or bundler. It usually does JS, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and it's usually kind of configured together with Babel. So Babel will take some of the newer features in JavaScript and then compile it down so that it works in all the different browsers and all the different versions. So you can write your new JavaScript, but still run it in older browsers. So kind of to do a little history, though, before all that, there was Grunt. And so Grunt was kind of a task runner. And you had to, to use it, you had to configure a lot of plugins. So you can see this is an example of a Grunt config. And this is just really simple. Normally, it would grow pretty fast. And so in order to use it, you'd have to know the plugin you wanted, and then also know all the different nested configuration options. Then we said that sucked. And so we got Gulp. Gulp, again, was kind of a task runner. But you would do it a little bit differently. Instead of configuring things, you would make pipelines. And it still has plugins, so you would say okay, here's all my HTML. Let me minify that. And then I'm going to send it to this destination. So this was a little bit easier to understand because you're just sending things through pipelines. But it's still just a task runner. It wouldn't really do things out of the box for you. So then Webpack came around and it was okay, we're going to do more than just run tasks. We're gonna do what most people do and pre-compile and bundle stuff together because that's what everyone's doing with JavaScript apps. But the problem with that, and with Babel too, is that we're back in configuration hell, just like we were with Grunt. And you can see on their site, this is their example configuration, and it scrolls pretty long here, and there's lots of configurations. And in order to use it, you have to know what all these configurations do. And so if you ever have to dive in and modify it, it can be a nightmare. Now, with that said, it's still actually a pretty cool tool because a lot of our default apps, if you use Create React App or the Vue CLI, you get a pre-configured Webpack. So, I wouldn't necessarily not use Webpack if you're a beginner. Use these tools, you'll get a pre-configured app, and you won't necessarily have to worry about it. But when you go in and actually have to modify something, that's when you get into the hell of configuration. And so, of course, it's always greener on the other side. So what are some alternatives if you don't want to use kind of the default Webpack Babel universe of tools? So one of the first ones I found is called Babel. So this is an alternative to Babel in that it compiles your newer JavaScript down to older JavaScript. And the cool thing about it is that it's zero configuration. You basically can't tell it to do anything, it just does it. And let's see if they have an example here. That's it right there. You give it your input, you give it your output, and it does the transforms. Now the downside of that is that you can't configure it. So Babel has a lot of different things you can do. Babel doesn't support all that, but the cool thing is it's pretty stupid easy to use. You just do it and it works. And it's pretty fast too also, since it's much simplified. Next tool is, I missed it, go back. Rollup. This is more of an alternative to Webpack. It's still kind of configuration hell, but It's a little bit easier because it's newer and kind of made for JavaScript bundling, where Webpack is older. So, Rollup is pretty similar but has less legacy, and you still have to have plugins. And so, but it does some cooler things kind of like out of the box. Webpack is kind of caught up. Rollup used to be the only one that was doing tree shaking. So now Webpack, you can configure that, and most of the default Webpack configurations do that now. So it's probably a little bit more complex, a little less complex, but so if you ever want an alternative Rollup for Webpack, Rollup is a good thing to look at. JS replaces both of them. And again, this is like kind of zero configuration. And so the downside is that's a lot of magic. The upside is you really don't have to do anything. And if you look at their documentation, they support all on the left-hand side here. All these different things work out of the box. You don't have to configure anything, and it just works. And similar to Babel, let's see, where's their CLI? You just kind of tell it your input and your output, and it does it. So, and it will go through and find your CSS, your HTML, your JavaScript, and depending on what it is, automatically compile it and bundle it together for you. So it's actually super simple, but again, it's only going to support these things on the side, which is a lot. Webpack probably supports more, but you have to configure it to do so. So in summary, there you go. There's some of the alternatives. If you're in configuration hell with Webpack and Babel, try some of these out. I've used some of them. And when you're doing like small apps and different things, they can be really helpful. Not having to do a Webpack config.
Well,
any questions?
So since we have 5 speakers, we had planned for having up to 10. We do have time for a few questions on each one, probably a couple questions. Does anyone have any questions about using these? It's interesting to me because I've had frustration with Webpack myself. And so I look at this and I'm like, I may want to try one of these and see how it works.
Yeah, so, definitely recommend trying some.
So also, Paul is on our Slack, and your Slack handle, Paul, is?
I am Pete's Panther everywhere.
So if you're on the Slack and on the JavaScript channel and you got questions, you can hit up Paul about any of these. So I really want to give Paul an extra hand. If I had a third hand, we would get some extra apps because, as I said before, he committed to do this. He got called out of town, and he said, "Hey, let me call in and do it." And we did it.
You're giving me too much credit because I just made the slides, so I didn't want to waste my work. If I wouldn't have made the slides, I probably would have dropped out.
So actually, Paul is a computer simulation he created.